Hi, everyone, and welcome to Cybersecurity Career Talks. I am Niloufer Tamboly, your host, your coach, your teacher on this journey with you as we explore different careers in cybersecurity until you find your dream job. Today, I have with me our friend Mohan Yelnadu and Mitesh Shah. Mohan is helping me. We are both going to be like aspirants trying to get into the world of mobile security. And our expert today is Mitesh. Thank you so much for joining us, Mitesh. Mitesh, one sec. Before we start, I will just quickly have our display disclaimer. So the views expressed in this presentation and during the session are the personal opinions of the participants and do not reflect the official policy or position of their respective employers. This discussion is a volunteer-led effort to contribute to the profession and pay forward the many instances of kindness and support that the participants have received during the course of their career. So we have Mitesh Shah with us today. This is a three-part series on mobile security. So we start off with mobile security in the sense like from a device and a administration and a security engineering perspective. The next week we are going to talk about how to secure apps, and the week after we are going to talk about API security. So Mitesh, can you lead our discussion today?
Yeah, sure. Mohan, if you want to kick off, and then I'll take it.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Niloufer, for the introduction. Folks, it's indeed a pleasure to understand, discuss some of the important aspects related to mobile ecosystem and its security in this three-part series. When we talk about mobile security, it basically consists of three major areas, right? One is the mobile device itself. The second part is the application that is running on these devices, right? And the third part is how that application is internally implemented, the mobile front end, which calls the APIs at the back end. So we'll be focusing on these three areas one by one in next three sessions. So today's session is focused towards mobile device security. And when we talk about mobile devices, we have multiple platforms, that we are aware of. We have seen it in day-to-day life, right? And most prominently, these are Android-based devices, iOS-based devices, and these are the most prominent platform devices that we have seen. Apart from that, if you are aware, there's Windows OS Mobile. There is Samsung has its own mobile OS and devices as well. BlackBerry also has its own. Nokia also has its own mobile OS device. So, out of all these devices, we in this session we will be focusing towards primarily on iOS and Android-based devices and its security aspects. With that brief context, let me hand it over to Mitesh.
Sure. Thank you for the introduction. And what we are going to cover, as Mohan mentioned, is that when it comes to mobile security, you have to think about from the stack, which is very fundamentally you have a device. And as we mentioned, we're going to focus on iOS and Android platform. And then beyond that, we need to look at the apps that runs on top of it. But before that, on the device itself, you have to focus it from the platform and the whole stack up perspective, which is basically you have fundamentally the hardware, then there is a firmware on top of it, and then that goes the operating system, and then finally the application. So whenever people want to get into this career, what we're going to cover is that what skill set you need, and then what type of teams you will be part of once you acquire that skill set. So starting from the very basic, from the platform perspective, you have to look at the iOS and Android both have their own platform. And one of the very good starting point is both Apple and Google has put a platform security guide out there. So what it will explain you, help you understand is the hardware security itself, what kind of security features are there. Biometrics, which is very popular, right? You have a Face ID, Touch ID, face recognition. So how that interacts with your fundamental platform device security. Then you move up in the stack and say system security. And one of the most important topic is from the security perspective is the encryption and data protection, because ultimately that's why we are in business, right? That the most important part of that. So I have put some helpful links from both Apple and Google here. And I think anyone who wants to get into this should read this thing page to page, every word, and understand yourself how they have defined the platforms. Because everything that you put on top of it will be controlled by what is platform is offering it to you. If Apple and Google are not offering something from the platform perspective, there is not a possible feasibility to control that part. So you have to understand and keep that in mind when you acquire that skill set. So let's go to the next slide.
But before we go to the next slide, let's, I have a question. So I will go in and read these two things, right? Do I need to have a developer account? Like suppose I'm creating an app or something. Do I need those things? What do I need to have? Like, can I just go in and download it with my Gmail account?
Yeah, these are just public documents. So it just helps you understand the architecture of the devices, how Apple and Google have designed their platforms with the Android and iOS. So these are simple documents. And then once the documents, as you go through, there may be links there that say, okay, in order to get in, you have to have a Google account or an Apple developer account. But majority of the link, if not all, in this today's presentation are more information that are available publicly, that you don't need any accounts or any subscription or anything like that. These are all public documents, and it just helps you structure. So my intention here is to help people understand what kind of skill set you need to acquire before you get into it, because there's two ways to it. I myself have done to some areas where I got in first and then I had to do it because I was hired for security area in my previous jobs for doing X, but then the mobile opportunity came up and I took it. And at that point, I had to go through this. But if I have to do all over again, or if I'm just getting into this is how I would do it. That's the way I have structured this deck.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. So now I've gone in and I've read these things.
Right.
What is next?
Right. So next is this NIST guidance. So hopefully most of the people are aware about it. These are the government agencies in the United States who put out documents for after years of research and significant investment in understanding the platform. And they have view into several government agencies. And based on that, they put out a guidance on how enterprises, how small businesses, medium businesses should leverage this guidance and implement the security in their own environment, right? Now, not everything fits because it comes from the government agencies, but at least you have a basic approach on how to think about it, and then you can apply those controls and guidance based on the risk profile of your organization. So whether you are in a very high risk type business or whether you are in a more medium to lower risk type business where user experience is more important. So it's typically you have to think about it from the user experience versus the security perspective. But this is where NIST has structured their documents that when it comes to mobile security, think about it, a device from a hardware, firmware, operating system, and application perspective, and how each area requires you to think. So although this document is a very mature document, and in some cases it's in draft, but you can leverage this to understand what kind of skill set I will need, right? Because when you read this, it maps that, okay, if you're in hardware area or mobile operating system area, these are the important areas to implement the security the right way. So, okay, how do I map that to my skill set, and what kind of understanding I need, information I need, what kind of hands-on experience I need. So that is the way I would interpret that in benefit of making a career in this area, right? Although that is not the purpose of this document, but it's really the guidance for people who are actually in it and looking to implement security. But for them, this is a baseline document because they are doing that for some time and they have to assess their environment on how that matches to the industry. But if you use this document to your benefit, you can also have a link to your career and say, okay, what kind of skill set I need in order to get into this, right? So that is the purpose of it. So these are the two documents that are direct, going deeper dive into device and application security from the NIST perspective. Okay.
I have one comment to add here. Yes, I completely agree with Mitesh. The slide actually gives a very good, depiction of the whole stack. Can you show the slide, please? So if you see from, it covers from the basic hardware layer, and then it moves up till the application layer. So now, as an aspirant who's actually trying to come into this domain, I may come from the mobile hardware side, or I may come from, maybe application security side, or I may be working in a security operation domain, right? So this document gives a good perspective in terms of what are the different basic elements, that I should be aware to get into this, mobile device security. And then it actually walks through very nicely, giving only what is a minimum required, and then it gives a lot of links as well to, as a reference to go further explore if you are interested, little more depth. So yeah,
right.
I agree with Mitesh. So it's a very good document, and it is updated very regularly. No, it's not like it's a 5-year-old document. So this document from NIST is very well updated, and people who want to join this should probably follow it as a Bible. I would say. Yeah.
Right. And one other thing to keep in mind is, even though you are a mobile app developer, you need to understand some of the platform features, because app leverages those features in order to provide the functionality, right? So the biometrics we talked about, that is actually a hardware feature, but now you're leveraging inside your app to provide a single sign-on type functionality, right? So people log in with their biometrics. So if you have a good understanding of that, then you can correlate the security behind it. That, okay, if I implement, because there is always a right way to implement and a wrong way to implement, and there is everything in the middle, right? So if you understand the other side of it just enough so that it helps you in your function. So if you're an app developer, you don't need to be like a super expert on that biometrics, but at least you need to understand some basics of it. Otherwise, sometimes accidentally you might defeat the security of it while implementing it. So that will be a good connection between the two. So if someone is in the area within the organization where they are building some custom bootloader for their devices, then they may stop at hardware and firmware and mobile OS, and they may take a deeper dive into those areas. But as you go up in the stack, you need to understand some previous areas as well, because then you can implement security more effectively, right? And then rest is all about your curiosity, how curious you are and how deep you want to go.
Sure. So if I am interested in, say, bug bounty, then this is like, this provides me with the how to, right? Because if I don't know how things work, then I can't like try to break in and try to do anything. So from that perspective, also these documents that you shared are really valuable, right?
Correct.
So this will give you the platform knowledge, and then bug bounty basically will require some creativity on top of it to think about different abuse cases and how things react to it. But if you do not have this understanding, you're kind of shooting in the dark. Versus here, if you have that understanding, then you can think it will trigger your thinking process with this knowledge for sure.
Right. And you brought that point very nicely, Niloufer. If I'm a bug bounty hunter, and I want to get into this area and try to, search for some big bug bounty tickets, in that case, not just a NIST document, I would need RFC documents, right? RFC meant for a specific feature, say biometric, face recognition or something. So I start with the protocol, the standard, and then I see in Android how it is implemented, in iOS how Apple has implemented. And normally what happens is these implementers go beyond the RFC statements, right? Because they want to differentiate against the competition. And that's where there is a gap that is left, where what should be there and what is not there. And that basically a bug bounty hunter can actually identify, exploit, create a proof of concept, and then submit to Google or iOS, Apple, and then hope to get a big bounty. And in the past, I think Mitesh would agree, there have been quite a few big ticket bounty vulnerabilities that were found by bug bounty hunters.
Yeah. So let's go to the next slide.
Sure.
So the next part is, so this is now more like the previous diagram we saw was the whole stack. Now I'm going to go into more, little bit more details that, okay, what you need to, starting from the basic device, right? So mobile device, when it comes to mobile security, the communication mechanisms that are listed here, right, that are pretty much people are familiar with it, right? You deal with Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, biometric, you have a SIM card in there. There is NFC when we use payment wallets and all that. But these are actually probably the mostly focused areas when it comes to security, because this is where the attacks happen. They leverage these channels because this is where information going in and out of the device, right? So they are attacking these areas. These are the kind of consider the doors to get into the device, because ultimately the objective is to get onto someone's device and capture the information, because once you get on the device, you have access to the data, right? So that's the core of it when it comes to mobile security, whether through an app or through a device. So today we are talking about the device. So these are the different channels that you need to understand. And when you read those platform security documents and the NIST guidance, you want to correlate these areas with that document and the guidance provided in the security. That will then tell you that, okay, now I need to understand this a little more. Or going back to your point about bug bounty, you need to understand these mechanisms and say, okay, how do I come up with some abuse cases to see how these channels react. So this is an extremely important feature before you go any further into the app. If you are new to this area and trying to make a career out of it, this would be the next logical point, in my opinion. So we talked about the hardware, we talked about the platform security, we talked about the communication channels. Now, in an enterprise environment, when people have enterprise applications that are made available to mobile devices, right? Because people are on the road, they are working remotely. So mobile first is a big push these days. Plus COVID situation has created some new opportunities where people are now working remote that they didn't. So mobile-based user interfaces are very popular. And when it comes to enterprise environment, a very typical way to secure those applications and devices is a mechanism called mobile device management. So essentially what mobile device management is both Apple and Google, they have platform security, and they are exposing certain APIs to manage that security. So for example, you have a device passcode on a device, right, that you can implement that actually has a direct correlation to encryption. But a mobile device management, if you are in an enterprise environment, it is not feasible to confirm with each user that have you implemented your device passcode or not. So how do I manage that security, right? And in order to manage that security, the tools that are out there commercially available are called mobile device management. So what with mobile device management, what it does is it essentially drops a profile on that device and say, okay, if it's a company-owned device or a personal device, they manage different ways. So if it's a company-owned device, typically they manage the full device. And then with that, they can implement a policy and say all devices must have a device passcode, right? So now you don't need to worry about individuals setting a passcode or not. If they want to have access to enterprise applications on their devices, then they must have that policy. Otherwise, mobile device management will not allow those apps to function. So it's considered more a broker between enterprise policies that you want to implement and the Apple and Google's platform security. That's where the mobile device management comes into picture. It can manage both some device level policies as well as some app level policies. So since we're talking about today the device, I gave you the example of the device passcode. As we move into the next week, I will give you some examples on how to manage the app level controls through MDM. Again, since we're talking about careers, if someone wants to go in this area in the device security, very likely you will be expected to know how mobile device management functions. There is underlying authentication mechanisms and some core security controls that works with mobile device management. It drops a certificate on the device. So those are the skill set that you need to acquire as you go into this. Yeah.
So one sec, I'll just stop sharing. Okay, so now I'm interested in a role. I'm like going to work for, say, maybe a company which has got like managers, say anything between 500 to 5,000 mobile devices. This is my job. I'm going to. So what are the skill sets that I need to have? Do I need to know how like mobile device management vendors for iOS, for Android, or is it the same? Or can you just speak a little bit about how
Right.
MDM?
So, yeah, definitely. So, as I mentioned, that MDM basically enables you to manage devices in volume, large volume, right? Because that way you can be assured that you are implementing consistent security controls. Device passcode is one of the examples, right? But in order to get into it, often what I have seen people is they just focus on MDM, but you should really understand how that MDM functions with the core platform security that we have covered in the first and second slide and the NIST guidance. Because then you truly understand that, okay, when I implement a policy, how exactly it is controlling the device and how effectively it is implementing the security, what it is buying for your organization, right, when you implement that policy. So I have seen people just memorizing the mobile device management policies, but they don't really understand how they work. And I strongly recommend that this is why I'm showing the whole path, right, starting from the platform security and then going into mobile device management. It is very easy these days to just learn mobile device management because ultimately it's all a user interface, right? You can just go and clicks and checks and read some description. But if you do not have that correlation on what Apple and Google offers and then how mobile device management is leveraging that APIs, underlying APIs, I think you are missing the bigger picture. So that's the way I would do it, is to correlate everything back to the platform security.
So if you are a little bit more mature, do you get called on to decide if this security policy that you have in place needs to be updated, or how does?
So we'll be covering some of those in upcoming slides on what are the industry standards for those policies. How do you baseline that in your environment against those standards?
Okay.
Hey, Mitesh, I think
Yeah, sure.
before we move on, can
Mm-hmm.
you please touch upon the corporate devices and the BYOD, because mainly from the sandboxing perspective, because I think the approach is slightly different, right? If it is a BYOD, that means it's my personal device, but I want to use my office or corporate apps on my personal device. But at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, I don't want to compromise the security, right, of those apps and the data. So, can you just touch upon how MDM varies in a corporate device and on the BYOD?
Yeah, sure. So this is again is driven by the organizational policies as well as some of the geographic region specific legal and privacy rules, right? What
Right.
you can and cannot do. So it's a joint, I would say, team effort between security, privacy, and legal. But generally, what I have seen is that when it comes to personal devices, what organizations do is they create a container on that device through MDM. So MDM has different ways to enroll your device into MDM. And one of the enrollment method is to create a container. Now that is properly designed and works for Android. In case of Apple, they have a slightly different approach. So in case of Apple, up until recently, they had a manage where you manage the whole device, but then you specify which apps are corporate apps so that the
Right.
personal apps are not visible to that particular. So it's not a clean container versus Android. They have a mode called work profile where it's literally like another little device within your device where it
Correct.
just focuses on that container. Everything for the corporate goes inside that. And if you
Right.
have to wipe that area, you just remove that corporate area. You don't touch anything on the personal side. Apple is now coming up with a new mode called user enrollment MDM mode, but it is still maturing, which is exactly that model. So, but as of today, what I have seen is in iOS, people manage the whole device, then they specify the apps that are corporate so that you can keep the personal app separate and corporate separate.
Correct.
And in case of Android, they implement the mode called work profile, which is a container on the device. So yes, that is a very important thing, but this is not something security should design in vacuum. Your legal and
Exactly.
privacy stakeholders are extremely important in designing that
Absolutely.
solution.
Absolutely. Very true.
Okay. So on that topic, good segue into the next slide, right? So how the mobile device, when you are thinking about mobile device management, what kind of architecture you should have in mind so that again mapping that to the skill set, right? So if you know how to do it something right way, then you can map that. Okay, how do I get there in terms of skill set, right? So that's the way we are trying to connect the dots here in this entire deck. So here on the left-hand side, this is again a NIST document diagram. So you have they have given an example with an email client, but consider that as just a device. Then you have mobile device management on the top with an enterprise app store. So mobile device management, when you implement, it does a few things. So it manages the policy, but it also offers an enterprise app store. So just like you have a public app store, Apple and Google, you have now an enterprise app stores because you are not pushing those apps publicly or making them publicly available. It's only available to the people who are part of that mobile device management enrollment, meaning any devices that are enrolled into MDM will be able to see it. So the idea is to you only push your enterprise apps into that app store and not put into the public app store. And then mobile device management will manage it. The other area is the network in the middle, right? Is always the case, which is where the VPN, because now you have enterprise apps on the device. How do you connect back to your backend, which is could be on your intranet all the way behind firewalls, not publicly exposed. So like on your laptop or your Mac, you use a VPN client. Similarly here on the mobile devices, one of the option is the VPN gateway, which just is publicly basically it will allow you to connect that device in the app that is running on the device into your enterprise backend. So this is an architecture to keep in mind as you explore the MDM. And again, as we mentioned that you may not be needing to be super expert in all the areas, but keeping the architecture in mind, you need to have some information from other areas because it is extremely important. Even though you are, let's say, an MDM administrator, right? Or you are a part of security operations, looking at the events that are coming from a threat defense, you need to understand the architecture because then you will be able to correlate how this can be a significant event or it can be just a normal part of business as usual, right? So that's why I put this architecture here for people to understand.
Okay, this is great.
I have a question here. Sorry. So the question is, where does the MDM administrator sit in terms of setting policies, creating rules? So because every device has its own life cycle, right? Like you onboard, you manage, and then you offboard, right? So if you can just throw some light on that.
Yeah, so depending on the program maturity of the information security in your organization, it could be a very well matured function where a security engineering working with security operations team, or it can be a combination of some function of it. The operation side of could be under a traditional IT, and then security teams, architecture and engineering, may be working with them to come up with the baseline policies and then implement it. And the IT teams may be facilitating that implementation for it. So I have seen all the flavors, and there is no right or wrong answer there. It's just depending on how it fits into your organization. But at a high level, it's security engineering, security operations, and then sometimes people have an IT team for mobility management. And so between those three, usually I have seen where people are.
Right. Yeah. Same here. In fact, I've also seen a lot of varieties. And as you rightly said, there's nothing right or wrong, and there's no best approach because it all is driven by how much resources you have in which departments, how much maturity you have in your security programs. Yeah, completely agree. Yeah.
So then it comes to I think we touched upon some of this. How do you implement, right? What skill set you need in order to implement the MDM best way? So there are, as we mentioned, we talked about BYOD versus the corporate owned devices. There are different implementation methods, and this is exactly what I was talking about, where Apple and Google have different modes of implementation. So that's what it covers. So you need to understand that. And then depending on that choice of that implementation mode, there are different policies available to those particular mode. And then you need to, how do I, people say, okay, if I'm new to this area, right, and I'm getting into this, I got an opportunity, how do I learn that what are the right way to implement these policies, right? So this is where the guidance is available by NIST. And here I have put here, you have always CIS standards, which is very popular. But the one particular I like for the MDM policies is the STATE, which is Security Technology Implementation Guide. So consider that CIS tells you what to do, STIC tells you how to do it, right? So it actually tells you that, okay, this is the policy for MDM that is offering, and this is the value you should set. And those are based on some of the input from government agencies. So again, what you need to do is take that and then match that with the risk profile of your organization. That, okay, if I do this, is this really an overkill for my organization? Or is this the right level of security? But what it will help you is that, okay, which policies I need to focus on, what I should look at. It gives you a good starting point that you can build upon, not just if you're already in it, how to do it, but also if you're just starting, what the right way to learn this thing, right? That, okay, what are the policies I focus? How do I learn it? And when you read that information from STIG, it actually gives you a rationale behind it, why they have chosen this way, which is extremely important to understand. So it will give you an approach to think, and then These are just examples, as we mentioned, right? iOS and Android, we are focusing, but there is nothing stopping you applying the same approach to other platforms as well.
Correct. Correct. Absolutely. I have a question here. So yeah, you mentioned about CIS and state, right? And imagine I'm actually responsible for implementing this. I refer CIS and I get idea about controls, and I refer stick document and I implement it, right? Based on how I need to implement. Is there any place where there's a checklist or kind of audit item list where I say, okay, I have implemented it, and then I go checking each box and say that, okay, everything is fine as expected, and now it's MDM is really very mature implementation.
Right. So usually the MDM products, commercially available products that manages the MDM, have a console, and that's where it actually shows you that, okay, these are the policies you have chosen, and here are the devices that are compliant with this policy. So it actually tells you the checklist, as well as it tells you what is the reality in your organization in terms of if any devices that are non-compliant, meaning MDM is not able to connect to those devices and not able to implement. If MDM can connect to it, it will implement the policies. That's typically the way it works. But it tells you the real ground reality of where you are in terms of implementation across the devices.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Hey, Mitesh, I have a question. Suppose I'm a small business. From what point on do I, like this mobile device management makes sense for me? Like what is the smallest, how many is the like smallest amount of devices that I can manage?
So I don't think there is any restriction like that in terms of like the smallest devices, but I see your point. What happens is, if you look at Apple and Google, since they are offering the platform security, and ultimately MDM is leveraging those capabilities when it comes to it. Both Apple and Google, they have their own way of managing that. In other words, if you are a very small business, right, and you have just a handful of devices, then maybe it makes sense commercially from the cost perspective to leverage those direct native tools offered by Apple and Google rather than a commercially available MDM tool, because it may not fit in your cost structure, right? So from that perspective, yes. Otherwise, if you are a organization where you are just starting it with few pilot devices and then going into you have a much bigger thing in mind, then those native tools, I don't think will be helpful, because once it goes beyond certain number of devices, it will be very difficult. That's where the MDM comes into picture. So it's really where you are in your journey, and then what's your end goal in terms of managing the number of devices and the cost associated with it, with the budget perspective. When you put all together, there are not many options. It's just either you use the native or MDM. Those are the only two ways to do it, right? So
okay, makes sense, because we have a lot of people who are like who work at startups, or they have their own startups, and they are like remote people and stuff. So that's why I was asking you this question. You know?
Correct. So where it will help is you still take the stake viewer and stick this guidance instead of and so those documents will give you information exactly what to do or how to do it. But then you need a mechanism to do it, right? Which is basically your MDM or the native tool. So if you are a startup, then those native tools will be your implementation method. You should still look at the state, and you should, in terms of the baseline security, and then you should decide that these are the policies I will implement. But then instead of implementing it through MDM, you are going and you leveraging the native tools to implement it. That will be the only difference there, right? So the fundamental guidance remains the same. The rules remains the same. How you implement it will vary depending on the budget and how many devices you manage.
Okay, perfect.
Is there any open source solution, open source MDM solution that the startups can try first if everything is fine, and as they grow, they continue to evolve from open source to maybe commercial tools. Is there any such?
Um, I haven't looked in recent past. There may be out there, but to be honest, I'm not sure about those right now.
Okay.
Next week when we meet, probably we'll all go and
Yeah,
look into
maybe something to expand upon. But that's a very good area. Maybe we should add here is that so that people can leverage, especially in the startup type environments.
Sure. And Mohan, you can take it up as an OWASP project if we don't already have it.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
So now we talked about all the security, right? The baseline security, the rules and the requirements, kind of like it's all in the bucket of that requirement. And then focusing that, okay, if I need to meet this requirement, what skill set I need. The next is you need to understand what are the threats, because up until now we talked about all securing, but why we are securing, right? What is happening so that we have a need to secure this, right? That's where the threats and defense will come into picture. So the NIST document that we have put the link in one of the previous slides also covers a section called threat mitigations and countermeasures, where they are listing all the threats. So once you then put side by side, you have all the requirement, platform security, and the policy, and then you put the threats on the side. It will help you understand that why people are asking you to do this, right? And that's where sometimes you might go in there as a user experience mindset, but once you read the threat description, you might change your mind and say, okay, now I understand why security teams are asking me to do this. So this is where the two things that are extremely important is this threat mitigation and countermeasures in the NIST documents. But more important is the MITRE framework, which is they call attack framework. It actually explains you what kind of capabilities the adversaries have in order to get through your security models, and what are the countermeasures to it, how do you remediate those, and what are the best practices. When you read that, you will have 100% connection into why we are asking you to learn all this baselines and the platform security and all that, because it does a very good job of explaining the capability that an attacker has in order to get to the crown jewels of it, or the target of it, which is the data on the mobile devices. So I always enjoy reading that framework, different capabilities. They constantly update it, and it is one of the best projects, in my opinion, that is out there. From the commercial standpoint perspective, larger organizations, again, this goes back to that MDM type concept. They use a mobile threat defense and mobile endpoint detection and response. So it's called MTD and EDR. These are huge commercial space out there. There are some very mature tools out there that people leverage, but that again goes to your organization size, how many devices you manage, budget, etc. But essentially, this MTD and EDR are building on top of those two NIST and MITRE framework. That's how they are actually sensing different threats, and then they provide you a mechanism to take action based on when the threat is detected, right? So every time, one of my big appeal to anyone who is getting into security is that when you look at a tool, try to match that with the core security function and say why we are doing it, why this tool is in business and what exactly it is doing. Then you will enjoy more, and you will be able to correlate that with the real world threats and implement effective security. And the skill set perspective, tomorrow a tool goes out of business or doesn't live up to the standard, you will not go out of business because you still understand the core security. You can easily pick up the next tool and you know exactly what to do in the tool because you understand the core security, the threat, and the countermeasure behind it. The tool is just a mechanism, right? So don't just attack on the tool, focus on the core behind it, how the tool functions, right?
So Mitesh,
yeah.
What you said was, thank you. What you said was extremely important, and I just want to bring that out. You said if suppose a tool goes out of business, then you know how to secure your environment. And now this helps you evaluate the tool also, right? If it is doing
right.
what you...
Correct. Exactly. It tells you your success criteria, what you are evaluating it against, what are your requirements, because you understand the your baseline requirements, right? You have requirements in mind rather than a tool in mind, right? So you are going ground up rather than doing a reverse engineering and say, okay, I'm taking a tool and what requirement it meets. That is not the right approach. Your approach should be, here are my core requirements that I want to get to, how this tool can help me. And you made a great point. Evaluation is one of the big area, right? That it's part of your job that you will come across no matter which team you are part of, and that will be very helpful skill set as well.
True, very true. In fact, one thought came to my mind, when you were explaining this slide about this framework. So suppose if someone asked me, hey, what I would lose if I don't have MDM solution in my organization.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
I can just point to this URL and say, just go through it for 15 minutes, and then you will self-realize it. Why you need an MDM solution, at least in the enterprise level. Yeah, thanks for that.
Right. Yeah.
And a lot of my friends, they like whenever we talk about, oh, we've got Cloudflare, and I'm not like saying anything about the vendors, but they feel that, oh, external security, right? Like here you have, like we are talking about internal security in the sense that now people have access to your internal apps or whatever it is that you are doing, because these are not external entities. These are people who can like log in. So securing your mobile devices also become very important.
Right. And think about it from the perspective of that iOS and Android did not exist at one point, right? And then they took over BlackBerry. So sometimes the whole platform will change, not just the tool, right? So if you have understanding of the core security and the threats behind it, you know now that, okay, new platform will be in business, how to compare that, my understanding of threats and understanding of the core security, and look for that in the new platform. So this way, you are going in with some basic information, regardless of which platform it is, right? And that also goes with Mohan's point earlier, that we are only covering iOS and Android, but the same approach will apply to BlackBerry and other platform as well, right? If you have to do it that way. So then I thought of like, okay, we talked about a lot of documents, right? And I realized that sometimes it's not as easy as just reading those documents. You need some formal training. I myself went through it. So what I just searched for some things. One thing that I came across is ISC Square recently has started some continuing education, some free classes for their members. So if you're a member of ISC Square with one of the certifications, and one of those training is mobile security from every angle. I think it is taking the similar approach that we have taken here, but actually it's a formal class. So I strongly recommend to go through it as a foundation if you're just starting it. Like if you're already in it, probably you're familiar with that content, but something to look into, and also keep an eye in that space, because I saw a different training program and now it's updated with a new title called From Every Angle. So it seems like they have included some other areas that are related to mobile security. Usually it's good to look for some internal training classes offered by employer. Right, they have some kind of partnerships with training platforms. YouTube videos, right, there is no shortage of it. There is so many of them. What I did for my own career, because as I mentioned, I was working on something in security team, and all of a sudden mobile opportunity came up. I took it. So I went through actually a SANS training class, which is very extensive. It's 1 week, every day, 10 to 12 hours, hands-on, everything. And then I took the certification test that is also from GIEC, this GMOB certification. That helped me understand the platform and all that. But again, this is not an endorsement, so use your judgment. I'm not saying that this is the only way to do it. I gave you throughout this presentation, we gave you the public content, which is where this information in these training classes are derived from, right? Someone took the time, they derived that information and put into a formal training class. So if you are a startup and just want to get your feet wet into this area, I think reading those documents and familiarizing yourself with the threats will take you quite far, to be honest, before you get into the formal trainings.
How long one would need an experience in this domain to go ahead and pass this certification?
I worked for about, I would say, good 12 to 18 months, and then I took the test. Actually, the training and test happened very closely because it's directly associated with the training, right? But I had some basic knowledge. So I read the platform security document after a while, though. After 6 months, someone pointed me and said, hey, there is a core document out there from platforms. And I never thought about that. It didn't occur to me that they let me go back to the basics of Apple and Google before I jump into some other area. So I did some out of sequence work, but now I put it together here in a sequence that I would do it again if I have to do it all over again, right? But I took it around 18 months into it. Test.
Okay. But any experience in this domain earlier would definitely help to
right, but it's not required. It's not required. I think you just need to understand some very fundamental
basics,
device level information, which pretty much everyone, because they use it day in, day out, they come across that information regardless. So there's nothing stopping you going into that directly as well.
Got it. Are we done with the slides? Or is
yes, we are done with the slides. I have a bunch of questions, but they'll need to wait for next week, Mitesh. This is great because now we are covering, like, if you are trying to get into it as a security engineer and you are thrown this opportunity to deal with securing devices, like from that perspective, next week we are going to cover from a perspective of how to secure apps. And then we are going to talk about API security, because that is going to be the main way in which you'll be able to talk to a database and display information or make sure that it's securely displayed. So thank you so much for joining us today. And please make sure that you are back again next week as we continue our conversation with Mohan and Mitesh. Thank you, Mitesh, and see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, so